You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, Accelerated Edition number 22. Today I speak with marketing manager and writer Kaitlyn Langham on healing in the midst of loss. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, Accelerated Edition, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I am Christina Reisinger, and today you will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release your fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hey, Kaitlyn, welcome to Faith Breathed Hope. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so glad that you are here with us to share your story. Can you start off by telling our audience a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I have been married for going on 3 years. I work full-time for a company doing marketing and social media management. In my free time, I love writing and taking care of my dogs.
Awesome. I love writing too. So today we are here to talk about coming from out of chaos into clarity and how you can heal in the midst of loss. So, Kaitlyn, the first thing I usually ask my guests to do is to share about their stories after they tell the audience a little bit about who they are. And as you and I have discussed off camera some, your story you feel is very complicated, but it did stem from a lot of emotional abuse and pain, having to go through a lot of different emotions, some depression and things like that. So there are a lot of people in our audience who can probably identify. There are so many people that look at their situation and probably say, you know what, nobody's going to understand. And we know that all of our stories are unique. So I'd like for you just to touch base a little bit on that pain that you went through, because what you're trying to tell people today, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're trying to tell people today that it is possible to move through that pain and that God gives us things so that it helps us heal and we can move forward and find hope. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. And that's what I've experienced in my life is I went through just kind of one thing after another. First, like recognizing that I had been emotionally abused. And then while grieving that, my dad almost died. And I was going through all of these doubts and all of these feelings like, doubting God and wondering why I prayed day after day after day. And for 2.5 years, and there was still no healing, and knowing that he could heal and him not healing, and why does he do that? And then praying over and over and over again, like every day, that he would heal my heart and that he would bring me out of this broken place. And then on top of feeling so broken, and as that was starting to be healed in me, I lost my son. And what's so crazy to me is that it was losing my son that restored a whole lot of the emotional pain and the things in me that had been broken or felt broken.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. God is so good and so interesting in ways that he delivers. I would be, like I said, I would be willing to bet that there's so many people out there who have continuously prayed and said, hey, God, here I am. This is my situation. I need change. And they begin to doubt because the pain is so heavy. And, I hear that quite a bit during loss, that people run the opposite direction because they were trusting God for a miracle or something. And it just didn't happen. And, myself, we lost our daughter, and that was something that I struggled with too, where I said, why would you? I never doubted God. I will say that. I didn't run away from God like I know some people have, but I did say, why? why would you allow this pain? Because my heart is shredded. So what did you, you said that there is a way to heal, and you said, ironically, your son who actually passed away was the one that helped begin that process of healing. Can you tell us,
Mhm.
before we get into that, a little bit about that story? What I'm always interested in moms who have lost children, because I myself am a mom who has lost a child, and my heart is full and aches at the same time for other moms that go through that. So, do you mind telling the audience a little bit about that story?
Yeah. I would love to. I love to talk about him any chance I get, because he, like, I don't care how short his life was. It made such a huge impact on me, and I know that every single life was here for a reason. And they have some part to play in the lives that end up staying, who are here, we continue living. And um I for me, I was at a really, really low place, and I ended up telling my husband that I thought that the only good thing that could happen in my life was if I had a baby. Because to me, a baby just seemed so perfect and so
Mm-hmm.
just so wonderful. And 3 months later, I was pregnant. And at the first doctor's appointment, they told us that I had a bicornuate uterus. And I had no idea what that was. And basically, it's a birth defect in me. Like, my uterus was shaped like a heart. So it was like, it had two horns. So like two completely separate, almost like I had two uteruses. So the risk of stillbirth was pretty high. The risk of preterm labor, um, him being small, there was a lot of risks.
Mm-hmm.
But I just was like, I just thought, like they said they would monitor me carefully and everything, and I just knew like everything was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got into the second trimester, they like upped how, like, it went to every time I went in, they were doing an ultrasound to make sure that he had room to grow and that everything was okay. And at 28 weeks was whenever they told me there was no heartbeat.
Okay. So when they told you that there was no heartbeat, the idea that you were pregnant had lifted your spirits at this point, or were you struggling the whole time because of the diagnosis?
I struggled quite a bit, but I felt like I was still struggling a lot with certain things, but I had started to reach for joy, and I kind of looked at it like I had to learn how to be joyful.
Mm-hmm.
So I started reading books on joy, and one of them was a book by Anne Voskamp about gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
I read that and started practicing gratitude. Like, I was looking for joy in all of it. And I feel like my baby taught me joy in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I was struggling through the diagnosis and all of that. But at the same time, I think what was really happening is I was starting to get clarity on some things. I was starting to see what was important.
Okay.
And I was starting to walk away from things that would in the name of protecting my son
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about his future and his life, I was starting to walk away from people who caused chaos and who just brought drama and just like disrespected me and disrespected my husband, because I was like, how can I allow these people to be an influence in my son's life if they can't respect his mother? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so it was, being a mom was just bringing so much, just a different perspective to everything in my life.
So when you found out that, and we're gonna go ahead and ask you to say his name. I think that that's extremely important, and I know that the audience would love to know his name.
I
So
named him William Caius,
William.
and William means strong warrior, and Caius means one who rejoices. And I felt like that was what God was calling out in me, was to be a warrior and to fight through these things that kept holding me back, these things that kept dragging me down, and to have joy. So that was why I named him that.
William Caius. That's nice. I like it. So when William Caius was when he found out that he was not going to be able to journey in life on earth here with you, I know that was devastating. Were you able? I'm sure it took some time. Were you able? Like, when did it finally click? Where this was something that I can continue to do. I can continue to feel this joy. I can continue to make these healthy decisions about people in my life, even though it's not for the protection of my son. And I will say that I had something similar when Isabella was in my stomach. Somebody gave me a book, and it was like supernatural faith or prayer or something. I can't even remember right now, but I was really praying each month that she would just stay in my stomach, and praying that we would get to meet her because she too was sick. And so, being able to bring a child and then into this world and then have to say goodbye so quickly, or in your case, have to say goodbye before it was time to even bring him in, can be extremely excruciatingly painful, to say the least. And it took me probably a couple of years after Isabella passed away to look at it as that she was a gift instead of the fact that she was stolen. And we didn't even talk about, how long ago did this happen?
It was a year ago last month is when I lost him.
And so these are some very difficult times right now. They, first and second year are very difficult. So can you tell the audience a little bit about how you're able to maintain that joy now?
Well, it was as I was, through my pregnancy, and as I was just learning, I was more like in the stage of like gathering information on joy, kind of. I was watching people who were joyful. I was like, how can I choose to be happy in all of this? And in all of this other stuff, I had, walking away from his grandparents in the middle of being pregnant with him and realizing that he wasn't going to grow up with grandparents on my husband's side or my side because of the things on my husband's side that had happened and all of that. That was a huge struggle for me, especially since growing up, family was my whole life. Like, I didn't know what life was with outside of them. And this is where I have had a difficult time, or I feel like people have a difficult time relating to me, because it was supernatural, happened whenever 2 weeks before I found out he didn't have a heartbeat. he was, and it probably actually started happening before this. But they told me he was in the 3rd percentile 2 weeks before, and I agonized over it. My husband and I both, we just were like, they had set us up a doctor's appointment with the perinatal specialist and everything. But it was 2 weeks out, and we stressed out over that. We were like, why are they putting it out so far? But like, they acted like it was okay. So we were like, okay, maybe that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And we just, through that 2 week wait period, we kept praying about it. Mm-hmm. And I had been dealing with some pretty intense stuff with family members. And some of them had gotten very angry at me over some things. And I was struggling through that. And I just felt this strength, is the only way I know how to describe it. Just like this resolve in me that I was not going to be a victim to this anymore. That I wasn't going to be drugged down by any of this anymore. That other people and how angry they got at me over my choices and all of this wasn't going to keep stealing my joy like this. And I just felt that resolve and started to feel that peace, even though I was still very much struggling through it. Mm-hmm. And then leading up to that, I ended up telling my husband at one point, I was like, so something's going to happen. I said, I don't know what it is, but something's about to happen. And he was like, okay. And I had no idea what was coming, but I just knew something big was happening. And it wasn't even necessarily that I felt like something bad was happening. It's just something big. And leading up, as we waited that 2 week period, we prayed and we prayed and we prayed. And we just started to feel peaceful. We started to feel really peaceful. And this is one reason why I think I haven't struggled with as much guilt with losing him or not like going to the hospital sooner, is because I had that peace. And I know that if he was meant to be here, that God would have put it on my heart to go to the hospital, but he didn't. He put peace on my heart. And I remember the day before I went in, I put my hand on my stomach as I was looking out the window, and I said, everything's going to be okay. And the next day, I went to the hospital by myself because my husband and I both were so sure that everything was going to be fine. Even though, they told us he was in the 3rd percentile, and we were thinking that, we may be having a C-section, our baby may be coming early because there could be something wrong with the umbilical cord and all of this stuff. We just felt this peace that everything was fine. So the next day I decided to go by myself so that my husband could work. And I was alone whenever they told me that. And I think there was something to having to pick myself up, having to face that by myself. It just, I don't know how to explain it, except that it proved something to me. It proved to me that I am strong, that I am not a victim to my circumstances. And because that was one of the things with the emotional abuse, was just constantly being told that I wasn't enough. I wasn't strong. I couldn't handle anything. I was too emotional. I was too sensitive. I was too all of these things. Mm-hmm. And being there in that room by myself, hearing this news and picking myself up from it. And this is what happened. She tells me that my baby doesn't have a heartbeat. And as soon as I could, I didn't get myself composed to call my husband. The nurse practitioner who was there called him and told him. And then as soon as I could, I called my sister and my sister-in-law, and they came to the hospital and they were there with me. And I told them, I said, I want to see for myself that he doesn't have a heartbeat. So they showed me and everything. And when I sat up, I said, I want those maternity pictures of him. I said, I asked my sister, I said, can you get a photographer, because I want those maternity pictures. And so to answer your question of how did you like see him as a gift and continue to have that joy, it just came. It just clicked in me, and I was like, I have to cherish this, because even though he was only here for 7 months, he was here. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful that he was here, even if it was just for 7 months. Mm-hmm. So the next day we went, the photographer came before I had to go to the hospital for the C-section. She came, and I had a beautiful dress to wear, and my sister curled my hair. I put on makeup, and we went out in the yard, and we took pictures of my stomach, and we were smiling, and we were happy. It was so painful and so beautiful at the same time. And it just, I just knew he was a gift, and I had to cherish it. And then for me, another big moment was walking into, or being wheeled into the room to have the C-section, and knowing that I had to hold myself together for my husband, because I couldn't expect him to carry me through it. Like that I had to, for my own sake, I had to be strong. And just the strength that Christ gave, but also that I was able, from a choice of my own, to say, I'm going to be strong like this. I'm going to hold myself together. And I did. And that may not be a big deal for some people, but for me, after being told so often, oh, you're just being a victim, oh, you're just being sensitive, oh, you're weak or whatever, now to look back at it, I just looked back at it and I just felt so, I just knew I was strong. Like it just proved to me that I was strong and that I could face anything. And it's crazy, but that was very healing to me.
I understand this idea of feeling like you need other people to validate you. So many people in general, not just women, but people look to friends and family and loved ones to build them up and encourage them and make them feel good. And when you don't receive that, or if you're told that you're too sensitive or you're a victim or that kind of thing, that can be very, very painful. It's certainly a good and inspiring thing to hear that you were able to learn that through your pregnancy and through your loss. And it's also very sad as well. But I will want to share something with you and in the audience as well. It's one of the most important things, biggest epiphanies I think I had received in my adult life was after our daughter passed away. And I was sitting in the doctor's office and he looked at me. I was in tears, I'm guessing it's been a while, but I was a hot mess after she died for quite a while. It was a couple of years. And I don't remember why I was there. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but he looked at me and beyond his duties as a physician, he said he's also a person who ministers, I think, or a missionary. And he looked at me and he said, do you know that your validation does not come from other people? Your validation comes from the Lord. And I'm completely paraphrasing. If you were to hear this, you'd probably be like, well, that's not what I said. But it was basically, that was what resonated with me, was that my validation comes from the Lord. And that has been that was such a pivotal moment, understanding that I love you. I don't, you're my family, you're my friend, whoever it is, but I don't need you. I don't need you to make me feel good about myself or to whatever situation I'm going through, because that's God's job.
Right.
And that was such a interesting moment for me, and that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. But I will caveat that with and say, we, as human beings, we can accept that peace that surpasses all understanding from the Lord, and it sounds like that is what you are given. But we also are human beings, and we need support. We need a support system. So I'd like to ask you, how did your support system look like at this point when you had lost your son?
At that point, it was phenomenal. Like, people just, they came around. Somebody paid for the photographer. Somebody, my sister-in-law bought my outfit for the maternity shoot. My sister showed up and did my hair. Like, everyone around me was so supportive. And yet there was so much about it that I couldn't expect them to carry. Like, there was so many times whenever I realized, and later on, Jacob and I discussed this, where we realized that we were given, it says, he gives each one a measure of grace. And we realized that there were some things involving our sons, the loss of our son, that we were given the grace to carry it, and the people around us weren't necessarily. And that, so there was like this realization that they're here and they're supporting me, but there was also this feeling of, I have to be strong for them. But also there was a bit of a struggle for me, not to necessarily expect them to carry me, but to just want them around me all the time, because I had walked through so much depression and so much of just feeling like, before I got married, I was still living at home, and there was some evenings. The evenings were really long at home for several reasons that I don't really want to go into. But it just always felt dark, and like this, like, depressive darkness. And I always hated it. And in the hospital one night, while I was still in the hospital and I was recovering, everyone had left, and it was just my husband and I. And that dark feeling, it felt like it probably sounds a bit crazy, but it felt like it was like over there across the room, and it was like creeping towards me. And I just had this intense fear that, like, it was going to cover me and drown me. And I was so afraid of that. And I was so afraid of, like, everyone to leave, and that the realization of what I had lost was going to come crashing down on me, and I was just going to be there by myself, drowning in it. So I wanted people around me all the time. So I told Jacob that night, I was like, I would really like it if Michael and Ruth, my brother and sister-in-law, would come back to the hospital. They didn't live very far away. And so they came back, and I had a conversation with my sister-in-law about it. And her upbringing had been pretty similar to mine, and she had experienced some similar things. And she encouraged me to let that dark feeling come and to sit with it. And I heard her, and I knew that her advice was good, but I so did not want to experience it. And what was amazing to me and what continued to carry me through all of it, through all of this, and to not drown in it, was the next morning. And I so wish I had the words to this song written down somewhere so I could read it. But the next morning I woke up and there was this song. It's by For King and Country called Burn the Ships. I don't know if you've ever heard it.
I don't know. I don't think so. Burn the ships.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It was, so that song was in my head and I had heard it before, but I never paid attention to the words to it. So I looked it up on my phone and I played it, and it was everything that I needed to hear. Everything. And the words to it were so perfect. And basically the message that God was putting on my heart was, burn the ships. Like, walk away from this. Walk away from your childhood. Walk away from all of the pain that you've experienced. Walk away from the people who hurt you. Just cut the ties. And he was going to teach me to dance on a heartache. He was going to teach me to step into a new day. That was the course of it. Step into a new day.
Okay.
It was so beautiful and it was so perfect. And what's interesting to me is that it wasn't necessarily related to my son. It wasn't necessarily related to the loss of him. It was so related to the pain I had experienced as a child. And this, like, it was just like me stepping into this whole new phase of life where I have joy and where I just drop all of this behind me. And one thing that the whole hospital experience, the people showing up and all of this, a lot of people came who just a month before were sending me really nasty texts. And the reality was, how do you expect me to find comfort in you after everything that has happened? And where my support system was, so my brother especially, just he just made that call and was like, no, she can't see you. And that, I have to say, was one thing that would have been, apart from having lost my son, I don't know if I could have done it, because I care too much about hurting people's feelings. And it would have been so difficult for me to just have cut that tie apart from that situation. But in that moment, it was like, I cannot allow these people into this very, very vulnerable place right now that I'm in. And so it was just, and even leading up to that point, I had already started to see that, but hadn't quite been willing to completely cut it off. And afterwards, when I was at home and I realized how much more willing I had been to walk away from these things whenever I knew that I was responsible for a little boy, I felt like I just heard God, he was just like, you'll do that for your son? If your son was enough, why wasn't your husband? And that has stuck with me. And I've not gone back on that. I have so much more, such a stronger boundary now to just put that up and say, I made vows to my husband, and this is the life that we're building. And if you're bringing hurricanes of drama, there's no place for it here. This is we have to protect our peace now.
That's such an interesting lesson. And like I said before, it's so interesting how God uses situations to further our growth. I did want to read this verse that you mentioned for our audience. I love sharing scripture. And so I looked it up. But so she had mentioned the measure of grace. I said, oh, okay. I don't know that I know that one. And so I looked it up, and it looks like it's Ephesians 4:7. And this is the King James Version. And it says, but unto every one of us is given grace according to the measure of the gift of Christ. That is a beautiful, beautiful verse. So I thank you for bringing that up. Through all of this, Kaitlyn, I know that you want to help other people. You want to help other people who resonate with your story. And I'm not sure if it's specifically mothers or if it's people, women, people who've gone through this pain and just feel like maybe they're not worthy of living even a better life. But what I'd like for you to do is speak directly to that woman or man even out there who is listening and says, you know what, I understand where you're coming from. This is similar to my story, or this is my story. I've had a really difficult time letting go of all the pain, feeling like I'm worthy, because I will say that there are so many people out there that do not feel worthy. And I really know that I want to enjoy this life, but it's so hard. Can you give them some encouragement?
I think if I could, looking back on my journey through healing from emotional abuse, through the most intense parts of it, if I could have just known, like, what I would have told myself now in that place, if I were to like write a letter to myself, I would say, you're going to get through it. It doesn't last forever, because I so often felt like, is there an end to it? Like, I just keep crying and crying and crying and crying over the same things. And I keep begging God to heal my heart. And even now, even after all of this, I was crying last night to my husband because these lies that I grew up believing, they still come back. And one of them is, you just can't handle anything. You can't handle as much as anybody else, because when I work a 40-hour week and then do my side hustle and then, try to get in my writing over here and keep my house clean, and I start feeling sick, I'm just like, oh, it's me again, like the girl that can't handle anything. And that is such a lie. It is such a lie. And my point is, in the most intense parts of it, it feels like, where is the end to it? But since I walked out of the most intense part, whenever I have a season of, or maybe just a week or even a couple of days of, continuing to fight those lies, or even to just give myself room to grieve over something that happened that I'm just now remembering from my childhood, or something that continues to hurt me, I know now it's just a season. Like, I just need to take this time and allow it to hurt, sit with it, acknowledge the little child in me that never got validated, that didn't get her emotional needs met, that felt scared, that felt alone. Acknowledge her, give her what she needs, and you'll get through it. Like, slowly you get stronger and you get stronger and you get stronger, but you don't get stronger by ignoring yourself or by ignoring that you're in pain.
It's also could be a time to reflect on the scripture we just mentioned, the measure of grace that is given by the Lord, but also giving
Yeah.
yourself that grace, correct?
Right. Yes.
So I do want to ask you a couple other questions before we are done. One being some, encouragement that you would give for mothers of loss. But before we do that, I wanted to just ask you where forgiveness popped into all of this. Was that something that you really had to work on as far as being able to move forward from all of the emotional abuse that happened when you were younger?
So I struggled a lot with replaying those things that were said to me over and over and over again and thinking about what I wish I could say back now that I have a voice and now that I am no longer like, now that I have a choice over how people treat me. And it got to a place where at one point I was just screaming at someone. I was screaming at the person who hurt me. And I so hated myself for doing that. And looking back now, I probably should have had a little more grace on myself, because that was literally the first time I ever just said, why? Why did you do it to me? Why did you treat me that way? But afterwards, I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be like that. And I struggled because I didn't feel like I forgave them. I didn't feel like forgiving them. And I don't suggest that people do this, but what I did at that time was I text the person and I said, I forgive you. And I don't know that I think I could have done that in a better way, but at the time, that's what I did. And I apologized for screaming at them and I said, I forgive you. And I was afraid to say that because I was afraid that I hadn't actually forgiven them. But I decided I made the choice. Now I can't go back. And so I continued to make the choice every day for I don't know how long it was, probably for a few weeks. Every time, all of that, I wanted to start replaying that all in my head again. I forgave them. Mm-hmm. And the feelings followed. And I found myself just recently, or not recently, really, it was, about 6 months ago, finally in this place where I could just say, rather than saying, oh, they're so evil. How could you do that to someone? How could you treat your little child like that? Instead of thinking those thoughts, I thought, they just didn't have the emotional capacity to love me the way I needed to be loved. Mm-hmm. They just didn't have the capacity to meet the needs that I had. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't have to demonize them. I don't have to make them out to be an evil person. They just didn't have what I needed.
It's a mindset shift, but not only a mindset shift, it's also a heart shift, where you're able to come to this place where, I think that Paul says it best. I love that he talks about, hey, and again, here I'm paraphrasing, but he says, I think it's in Philippians, and he says, I've had a lot and I've had a very little, and I'm able to be comforted in every situation. And I think that the more that we strive to be like Paul, and it's not for everybody else, it's for us. Because then we're able to have that peace that surpasses understanding. It's that supernatural peace, and people can look at you and they say, oh my goodness, you've been through X, Y, and Z, but this is how you respond to that situation.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect you to respond this way because it was terrible. However,
Mm-hmm.
I see you respond this way, and it shows maturity in our Christian walk, and the ability to know that the Lord is good and that He does what He says He was, and that He wants us to have that joy in this life. And
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time telling people that, God didn't put you here specifically to suffer. He tells us multiple times in scripture that He wants us to enjoy this life, that He,
Right.
according to being in alignment with His will. But one of the scriptures that got me through everything was, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, meaning here on earth, and
Right.
when people go through a loss and pain of the magnitude that you're talking about, it can cloud their thought process and their heart to where they can't see that hope. So
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to just speak to the moms there, if you have any kind of encouragement for a mom that has gone through loss, because not all people who have gone through loss share your perspective. Not all people who have gone through any type of situation, can strive or even want to strive to be like Paul. And yet they're in a lot of pain and they feel like there's no hope. So, do you have any words of encouragement for that mom who is struggling?
I I think one of the what I've heard other moms what they struggle with in loss is like struggling to be happy and struggling with feeling guilt that they're happy. And one verse that really stuck out to me was when David had sinned with, I may have the story a little wrong, but whenever he's one of the sins that there was a couple that were kind of major sins, but one of them, his son was taken. His son was sick, and I think he laid on the ground naked with ashes, and he fasted and he prayed and he begged God to spare his son's life while he was sick. Then, whenever he died, his servants said they were afraid to tell him, because if he acted like that while his son was still alive, what was he going to act like now that he was dead? But that's the perspective we have.
Mhm.
But David's perspective was completely different.
Mhm.
And he heard his servants whispering, and he said, the child's dead, isn't he? And they were like, yes. And he got up and he washed himself and he asked for some food and he sat down and ate. And they were so confused. And he said, well, while he was, I can't go to him. He can't come to me, but one day I'll go to him. So basically, there's nothing I can do about it now.
Mhm.
He's gone. And that really, really hit me. And it really comforted me, because if it's just that realization, it couples with the verse that says, we grieve not as those who have no hope. We have a hope. We're going to see them again one day.
Mhm.
There was, during the last, after the 2-week recovery for me from the C-section, I felt like heaven had literally just come down and I could touch it. I felt like I could close my eyes and I could see him there in a perfect place with a perfect father who would never screw up, because I know I was going to screw up as a parent. And that was one thing that was so difficult for me to think of, is screwing up on my son whenever, I had parents who didn't really know how to love me. And the thought of me being a broken human and trying to love my child, there was just this fear that I wouldn't be the mother that he needed me to be. And him being in heaven with a perfect father, knowing perfect love, was such a comfort to me, even more of a comfort to me in some ways than if he was right here and I was holding him, because he would never know this pain. He would never know this heartache. He would never, just none of it. Like, he's the one that, got it all. And in some ways, Jacob and I will joke about it, and we're like, that little stinker, he stayed in the most perfect place on the earth that you could be in your mother's womb, right under her heart. And then right before it was time to come and face anything difficult or hard, you just skip off to heaven and you're in this perfect place. And we would just joke about, we'd sit and talk about him just being a stinker. And that brought a huge amount of comfort to me, and it still does when I really, really miss him. Just sitting there and thinking about just all the people he was with. Jacob's great grandma, who was the sweetest person ever. I just imagining her holding him, imagining the other babies he was with, imagining him growing up there. Like, I just make up this whole world in my head of the life he's living and that he's growing up. And one of the things that I love, and I tell people this all the time, I like to think of him growing up. So I like to think of him being a year old right now. And somebody else said, well, that seems kind of sad because you're missing out on all of it. And I was like, well, and this person who said it to me, her brother had died of cancer. So, it wasn't like just someone just giving their opinion. She understood. And I was like, well, either way, we're not going to be disappointed if we get up there and we see that it wasn't what we thought it was, because there is no disappointment in heaven. Like, it's just going to be better than what we imagined it to be.
Amen.
So that's where I go for comfort, is just making all of that up in my head, just thinking about all of it, and just,
it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful, thinking about that image from him being tucked away close to your heart, and then getting able to accelerate his time into heaven. I have often imagined Isabella sitting in Jesus's lap, like as he rocks her, because I can't rock her here, sitting in a rocking chair or something. And, interestingly enough, that was what really helped me too. I remember, and I was 2 years out, so it took me quite a little bit longer than you to come to this space, but I was still struggling in year 2. And my husband, and I've shared this before, but my husband and I were talking, and I still had the whys and the woulda, coulda, shouldas, well, what if this happened, and this could have happened, and this should have happened, and maybe I should have done that, and all that kind of stuff. And I was just torturing myself. And he said, well, what if you get to heaven and maybe God tells you, why, and maybe he doesn't? Is it really going to matter at that point? And I started thinking about it, and it may be in conjunction with somebody else that I spoke to, because some things are a little bit fuzzy when we go through loss. But, I came to this place where I said, you know what? I am going to get to see her again one day, and I cannot wait, because she is in that perfect place. When the people after she passed away would say stuff like, God, you got your miracle. I think that was one of the ones that really bothered me. And I thought, well, no, I didn't get a miracle, because heaven doesn't need any miracles. I needed the miracle here on earth. And so I can imagine that she's there in heaven waiting on me. Everything is perfect. She's rocking with Jesus. She would be 5. We just celebrated her would-be 5th birthday this in the end of January. And so, I'd love to kind of imagine as well, what would she look like right now? What, her long, curly raven locks. She had dark brown hair and dark eyes and things like that. And so I think that is a really cool way to do that. And it is very interesting that you've already come to that space. Hey, we get to see him when we go to heaven, and it's something to look forward to. We want to go to heaven, we want to be with Jesus, but now we have somebody else waiting for us there as well that we get to reunite with. And so that's quite an amazing thought. So Kaitlyn, it's coming time that we need to wrap things up, but I'd love for you to be able to share with the audience where they can find you.
You can find me at Miss Kaitlyn Eileen. That's Miss Kaitlyn. Eileen is EILEEN on Instagram, and I have a Facebook page for my writing as well. And I'm also on Medium. I don't have a blog, but I am on Medium if anybody reads articles on Medium, and it's the same handle.
Okay, awesome. And can you tell us what is it that you write? Is it blog type articles?
Yes, it's about I love sharing about personal growth, about my relationship with Christ, about walking away from religion and finding Christ in who he is, and not in this angry man in the sky who's waiting to pounce on every mistake that you make. And I mostly just love to share my journey and my spiritual and personal growth. And
awesome. Wonderful. Okay, so check out Kaitlyn on Facebook and Instagram. So for those of you who are here and listening and you are interested in knowing, we have our Second Kingdom Women's Summit coming up in April. So look for more details to follow with that. And our Grief Symposium, since we are talking about loss, is coming up in October. So that will be the third annual virtual grief symposium. Continue to be blessed and bless others. Thank you so much for being with us, Kaitlyn. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.